All right, old business, we're going to policy 890, parent organization and booster clubs. Kevin?
I submitted a draft to the board. This would technically be the third draft. 890, the original. The second draft, which should be dated, I believe, June 7th or June 10th. And then I had in the board book packet one that's dated August 14th. As instructed by the board, I met with the RBEF. I attended one of their meetings. I met with President Tony Garvey from the booster clubs, and Pam and I met at separate times with representatives from the PTO. I spoke with them this morning, and Pam attended their meeting and went through policy 890. Overall, the general response in regards to the policy 890 and some of the recommendations that the board is putting on here were very positive. All the groups felt that it would help increase transparency and eliminate any questions on their activities or their operations. The consistent concern that I heard from all the groups was management of cost. Originally in one of the drafts that I combined it from the original policy to the board members' recommended policy was the annual audit. So in my most recent one, I did strike that and just say if the organizations would post their quarterly financials, such as accounts payables and receivables, as well as every year just post a copy of their annual IRS 990 filing. All the groups felt that was more reasonable than enduring the cost of $1,000 or $1,200 to pay for an annual audit, as well as the purchasing of the insurance and the upkeep of a website. So what we want to make sure is that 20% of their fundraising dollars aren't going out to meet the requirements of this policy. So we talked a little bit about the transparency, and the key thing is maintaining their web page with the accurate information. And then the insurance policy, we did get one question from PTO in regards to the insurance policy, and we talked with them about protecting themselves in regards to liability and management of their money should one of their members do something, as well as our school insurance does cover them, but it's a good idea to have separate things in the event that they host events and someone would get injured. But overall, the general response I received from all the groups was they're not opposed to it, and a lot of them are waiting for the board to take action before they start finally posting and putting the information up. A lot of them have asked, when do we think this will be action will be taking place? I know in the article that was in the Landmark it mentioned September. I thought after our discussions tonight, if the board feels we're in a place to take action, we can consider it tonight. If not, we can wait till September. But for the general part, in the recommendation I made this board meeting for the August 14th copy, if you notice the changes I made, I'm looking at it myself. I added a little more clarification on organization contact information, meeting information, monthly/quarterly financials, whichever they meet on, such as account balances, payables, etc., and a copy of the organization's annual IRS 990 filing. In regards to the citizen comments regarding conflict of interest and political activity, those I carried over from one of the board members' recommendations, so maybe the board would like to discuss that in a little more detail, what they meant by those, or if we need to make any additions to the version I'm recommending, or the draft I've brought up at this time. Questions, thoughts?
When you spoke to the officers of each group, when you talked about the services of the designated liaison that's mentioned in the last paragraph of the policy guidelines, do they understand that the liaison would take an active role in helping them comply with some of the requests that we've made of them for transparency, like preparation of the 990, preparing the quarterlies and things like that? Or is that up to them,
I think,
with at least cursory assistance?
I think it's more cursory assistance in that the liaison's there to get responses back from me, or to get clarification on things from myself or from Mr. McGinnis.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think, as stated earlier, I don't think the Board of Education or the school districts wants their administration filling out an organization's 990 or working
No.
with them on their
But
990.
at least they could point them the way, though.
Sure, and we've talked
Here's the
about that.
form, fill it in.
Right, we've talked about that with them. We've talked about, once the board does take action, having support there as we work with them on their web pages and information that needs to be posted and how to post some of those things. I think the overall message that I think I want to make sure I get out there again clearly is that these groups are helping us.
Yes.
So the goal is not to discourage them from participation in the high school or to make it difficult for them to increase their membership or increase fundraising activities that will benefit. It's just to help increase transparency, eliminate some of the questions that have been circulating out there so that we can all work together on moving RB and the activity programs and all the great things we're doing forward with our parental groups. And a lot of them have said that, have shared that with me. They're ready to get moving, and they kind of want to know what the final decision is by the board so they can get their web pages up and we can move off of this, and this does not carry on as a topic of discussion.
Thank you.
Any
Sounds
other
good.
questions? Mike, you want to?
After the community member spoke, I just went briefly, and I give no authority to whatever website came up, but the National Council of Non-Profits under Conflict of Interest says a policy governing conflicts of interest is perhaps the most important policy a nonprofit board can adopt. And later on they say a conflict of interest policy should require those with a conflict or think they may have a conflict to disclose the potential conflict and prohibit interested board members from voting on any matter. That's sort of the subject matter where I think that conflict of interest comes from. The 990, if required, actually asks a question on the form: did the organization have a written conflict of interest policy? So it's something that's on the form, and it's, in my view, recommended that they have something of that nature. As far as the draft policy at this point, again, what do we mean by account balances and payables? When you talk to these organizations, are they posting their check registers? Is that what the payables is?
I met with the foundation, and they provided an example, and it was similar to what the boosters had talked about, kind of like a Quicken report, just showing the checks that were written from the previous meeting to the current meeting. Now, a lot of those are scholarships and grant money, so they blacked out the names of the recipients out of respect to anonymity for them, but it was showing that yeah, what checks were written and for how much.
So
And then the account balance remaining and stuff like that.
So with the understanding that that's, like the check register, I agree with that. And then I guess perhaps at the end of number 7, a copy of the organization's annual IRS 990 filing, I would just put if required, because there is a threshold where it's not required for everybody. So,
Okay, so after the annual IRS 990 filing, just maybe put parentheses if required.
yes.
Okay.
And then political contributions. Obviously, if you're some kind of 501c3, I think you're even prohibited from doing political activity. So when the word political activity comes up with these organizations, they should be already as far separate from what they're doing. So I'm not sure what the question was about political activity, but none of these organizations should be doing any political activity.
Okay, any other questions on this?
Well, as an organization, but not as an individual.
Right, well,
Yeah. And
nothing here
that's-
is
that's
asking the
clear.
individuals to
Right.
disclose their political activities as part of being a member of an organization or a board member of an organization. But they should have a policy that reiterates that they
No,
shouldn't be
not
doing.
as an advocate.
That the actual organization shouldn't be doing any political activity.
Right.
I think that's where that comes out in the policy. And I'm not sure which version he was referring to. Was it your June version, or was it my board member version? So,
By the August 14th.
I think they're in both.
Yeah, it's in both.
I didn't change that.
okay.
All right, any other discussion on this?
Yeah, the question that was asked was, what do you mean by what's here on the conflict of interest, was one issue. This policy, as much as I don't agree with it, but I agree we need to move on, just says they have to have a policy
Right.
procedure. The problem is, how are we going to micromanage that? Kevin's going to have somebody read them all, and then are they going to be presented, and somebody going to try to manage these policies? Then they say, well, that one's not good enough or something. That's, I think you're opening Pandora's box on this, but since it just says you have to have a policy, you could say anything. The other thing is, Pam, you might want to suggest to the PTO, and I think it's the only one in effect, often when you belong to
Can you
national...
talk up like Henry?
Often when you belong to national organizations, part of your fee covers insurance. They might be willing to...
Yeah, they said that was the PTA, but not the
Okay.
PTO.
I did
So
speak with them
They would
today
have to
about
get
that.
separate,
Uh,
yeah.
But again, I'll just reiterate, I think this whole policy is just overkill. I think that 99% of the time we adopt the IASB policies the way they recommended, and unless there's some specific need at our school that's not somewhere else, and this one is so far afield from what we've seen, well, IASB or any of the other ones we looked at. But the most important thing is if they think they can comply with it and we can move on to some more significant matters that the board needs to address, I think that's what we need to do.
Well, the insurance issue was their biggest issue because they don't have a lot of funds and they try and give all the funds back to the school for the field trips and the programs that they've supported. So that was their biggest concern, and they were looking into that and what that would take away from, funding. And then just the amount of people they have to look into that. They have 10 to 12 people that are really working, like they were here today, distributing T-shirts. They put on a wonderful event last night, welcoming freshman students and their parents, and so they have kind of a skeleton crew of volunteers, and they are, they're worried about that, looking into that, and who do we know that can give us good information on that, and their question was really, what was that insurance to protect them from? They were trying to understand that. Was it, like Kevin mentioned, to protect them from something if one of their members did something that was, unethical or illegal, or was it to protect if they don't really host separate events here? They're always supporting events that we have. The only thing that they would host here is a meeting, because they help us with, like, Bring Your Child to Work Day, but that's our school event, or they help us with Veterans Day, and that's our event. So they're really not putting on their own event. So they thought, was that because if somebody got hurt, then the school didn't want to be liable because we did something that might be negligent in setting up a tent for an event or something like that. But they basically were saying they only support our events. They don't have their own independent events. So they thought, we don't want to spend a lot of money on that kind of insurance. It'd be better if we were to have an event to get one special, policy for that event. But, so there was concern on those issues, the amount of money it would cost and take away from the programs they were trying to support. And then we just don't have a lot of people to do a lot of extra work. We're just trying to trudge along and get as much done as possible with the few volunteers we have. Always looking for more volunteers out there, so if anybody wants to participate, they would love it. So,
Any other discussion on this?
Yeah, I have a couple. It seems like number 7 is redundant because we asked in number 6 that they be a 501c3 and comply with that. And if they're going to comply with those requirements, which are federal, then we don't need to require the second half of number 7, financial reports. We don't even have to write them out because otherwise they wouldn't be able to be a 501c3. I am concerned about number 2, including but not limited to. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to people who have parents, families who have volunteered and given to this school for 100 years. And now, we're going to open the door so we can police it. I have a concern on the very back. We say, at no time does the district accept responsibility for the actions of any parent organization, yet we take great pains to micromanage. We're managing exactly everything they do on their letters. If any of us were to go to those meetings, these organizations have provided this information. If you go to a Patrons Council meeting And I have notes for when my children were here. There was a list of the budget and everything that was spent. And when my children were here, we asked the insurance question, and the only thing patrons did is they had the one major fundraiser, and they were told, we as an organization were told that came under an umbrella from the school. And for over a decade, we were told they were covered under the school. So I am greatly concerned that putting extra requirements on parents, many families have two parents who work, they're busy. I think we will see a decrease in participation. I am concerned.
So, can I say a couple things? Number one, we had asked the administration to reach out to these organizations to see if these were over cumbersome. For the most part, except for what I'm hearing on PTO and the insurance policy cost, they've embraced these. A lot of these are setup issues. You don't go and do your bylaws every year. You look at them, you set them up, you create them. They're not reoccurring activities. You set up a bylaw, you identify those, you state what your policy is going to be, you move on. Could be, those bylaws could be out there for 25 years. It's not an annual thing, so you're not asking them to each year look at them, spend 6 months creating bylaws. You move on. The one issue I heard back, what administration is telling us may be cumbersome, is the cost of insurance. And maybe that's something we need to look at. Other than that, the organizations have said they're embracing these. Am I putting words in your mouth?
Right, and the foundation, if I'm not mistaken, is on board with the liability insurance, and the boosters already purchased their liability insurance. Because as they did some research into it, they thought it was a good thing, because included in that policy was if anything ever happened with somebody doing something illegally with their money or their stuff. So I spoke with Mr. Garvey. They were on board, that the foundation understood it because of the telethon and the people coming in and doing different activities and stuff like that.
Okay, so the one issue we have to address is PTO's concern about the cost of insurance. That is the one issue that we've heard negative feedback on.
Well, and Ms. Sikowitz came, who was a former administrator and a former board member of patrons, and said, please do not overregulate us. We've
Okay,
had
so
other...
let us ask, has the PTO and boosters, has anyone else issued a concern about this other than the insurance?
No.
Okay. So
Okay.
let's address what the concern is, which is now the one issue with the one organization out of the three is coming back and saying insurance cost is a potential issue. Other than that, everything else appears to be okay with them. They haven't expressed anything. We didn't go reach out to them, the board didn't reach out to them. We've asked the administration to reach out to them. They came back, some of them were positive, coming back saying, actually, it's good for our organization. The only issue that the one organization is raising is the cost of insurance, and they're concerned about that. So we should then focus in on that issue and see if we can get that resolved within this policy.
So I just want to say that the administration talked to maybe 3 or 4 people, and the way we talk
But they
about...
are representatives of those organizations.
Right, and we've had 2 people come who are also representing the organization, but yet we want to spin it as if the whole organization, through the representation of those 3 people,
Okay,
are
but
on
we
board.
presented to the administration to go reach out to those organizations and to have the member of those organizations represent the organization. They knew what the purpose of the meeting was. They knew what they need to do. They designated a representative of their organization to come talk to the administration and present their case.
Okay, so this is going to go back and forth. Any other discussions from any other?
Yes, I haven't gotten my...
Yes, John, we're waiting for
Thank
you.
I'm at the website, the RVHS website, under athletics. You can click on boosters. You know, it's set up really nicely. They've got the membership form. All the people watching on TV, I encourage you to join. Additionally, there's the bylaws. I'm not sure who made these bylaws up, if they've been revised lately. It basically gives most of the things that we were talking about. They may have to put in a conflict of interest thing, but I'm sure there's a policy on how they're going to do that. I don't think we're micromanaging anything. I think we're encouraging transparency here.
for all these organizations, and I think it's actually going to help them grow. If there are specific concerns, we can always amend this policy in the future.
Okay, anybody else?
Well, we addressed the insurance before. We had Tim or somebody call our insurer,
Tim did
and they
check on it.
said our insurance would protect us for this liability that they would provide. So we already had addressed that. We talked about the only one who's going to be advantaged by the boosters, or boosters is different because they might have additional liability for like their
Foundation
golf.
needed
The foundation and the, what's the other one?
Foundation needed a
Not
separate.
the foundation, the other,
right, but
Patrons
the-
Council, the PTO now.
PTO, right.
That our liability insurance would cover the kind of liability the school would face if they were involved in an
And
organization.
so I'd be more than
Yes.
willing to go and give a waiver to them on the insurance.
Right.
Let's have it in the policy and grant a waiver to them that they'll fall under our insurance.
Just so we're on the record, we checked with the insurance, the foundation, because it is a foundation, needed to have separate liability insurance. Boosters and PTO were covered under our general liability insurance.
Right.
Wasn't necessarily correct.
All
So
right,
we could change number 8 to say at the end, unless waived by the superintendent. And then we resolve that issue, don't we?
Yeah.
would there
which
be
is
any
fine.
problems with that? Nope. Okay, so I'd like to have a motion with the 2 amendments for the August 14th policy. So the 2 amendments would be, hold on, I'm scrolling down, would be on number 7, after IRS 990 filings, if, and put in parentheses, if necessary,
If required.
if required. And then on number 8, an agreement to have a certificate of insurance naming Township District 208 as named insured on their liability policy. What do we want to, how do you want to adjust that, Gary, or how do you want to?
Unless waived by the superintendent.
Unless waived by the superintendent, okay?
Payables is spelled wrong at number 7 too.
Okay. All
Good
right.
catch.
Could you get that spell check fixed? All right, so do I have a motion to, for this
Resolve,
with the modifications made? All
read
right.
it with the modifications.
Yeah, just modified.
Resolved that the Board of Education Township High School District 208, Cook County, Illinois hereby approves Board Policy 890 with provisions discussed in the meeting on 14 August 2012, parent organizations, booster clubs, as presented and discussed in the August 14, 2012 Board Agenda Packet,
Why don't you put with changes?
with changes.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mike Welch. Any other discussions? Mary Ann?
Ms. Ruska?
No.
Dr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Moon?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Gryczan?
Yes.
Mr. Cindy?
Yes.